Two things I want to talk about. I want to talk about quarterbacks, and I want to talk about coaching dilemmas. No better person to talk to than Steve Logan. You have your own little radio gig. I was watching you on a podcast with Steven Igo, who we talk to every once in a while. And so I'm like, I got to talk to Steve because something that you talked about with Steven the other day is something I wanted to get to with you, but we're going to do that second. Let's start with Bryce Young.
All right.
If we had this conversation about Bryce Young 3 months ago, we would have been like, who knows? Man, it looks terrible. It looks completely lost, like he can't play. And then the progression, the finale was outstanding. What are your thoughts on what Bryce is and what he can be?
Well, it was an absolutely fascinating journey to watch. And, I'll give myself a little bit of credit. I didn't throw the kid in the trash can after the first 3 weeks. I kept saying, you just don't know because, I've fiddled with quarterbacks for too long. And as I was coaching some of them, I still didn't know. And you watch the progression and you watch some of them crash and burn and you watch some of them grow into it. But, I'm happy for Bryce Young. I mentioned to you many times a young man that coached him at Alabama is a good friend of mine, and I talked to him a lot about, working with Bryce at Alabama, and he was really high on him. But he did caveat all of the conversation. He said, Steve, he's just so small.
Yeah.
And I just don't know, and it kind of shocked me when they took him in the first pick of the draft and blah, blah, blah. So even, and there it is again. There's the guy that was working daily with him at the collegiate level. And what's always tricky is you're watching a young man surrounded by elite talent at the collegiate level. And, compare Bryce Young right now, let's say go back to Mac Jones.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing, right? You got this guy that's really playing good at Alabama, and it did not translate to the NFL because the talent around him was covering up some fatal flaws. And so you begin to wonder, well, is this the same thing with the young kid? And it looked that way early on, but he's grown. And I'll tell you the best thing that happened, and I can relate to this, because when I was at Tampa Bay, we drafted a young man that was really only like 19, 20 years old, a sophomore out of Kansas State, Josh Freeman. And Josh came in, and he got thrown into the mix way too early. And at no point was it ever discussed to pull Josh back off, bring him off of the starting job and let him sit on the bench for 2 or 3 weeks. And they did that with Bryce Young. And I think, something like that was really beneficial. And I think it was a game changer for the kid to go to the sideline, kind of regroup, let the game, let's see what the game looked like from a little bit different vantage point, and then come back in and see if you can, improve. And that obviously happened. I think it was a really good move by the Panthers. But I'll tell you what it also speaks to is what I consider to be the best model for developing quarterbacks in the NFL is the Green Bay Packers. They're brave enough to bring a guy in, Aaron Rodgers, sit on the bench for 2-3 years and just sit there until Brett Favre has got to go. Okay, well then bring Jordan Love in and just sit there. And guess what? Jordan Love comes onto the scene, and it's like the Packers never miss a beat, and it's like nobody else in the league is brave enough to do this.
The salary cap doesn't allow you to do it now. The salary cap almost forces you. It shouldn't, but that's the way people have treated it. It forces you to put these quarterbacks on the field immediately and take advantage of the fact that they have low wages for the first 3 or 4 years of their careers, so you can build teams around them. Of course, that's not what the Panthers did. They had a terrible team around their quarterback the first year and didn't have a great team around him this year either. But did the quarterback that you saw in the last handful of games, did that resemble somebody that might have been taken first overall?
Well, I'm still not going to go that far with it. I'm really not. I think that this young man can be competitive. I think you can win with him. But I still, I just always come back when I went into the NFL. I had my mouth shut and ears open and eyes open. I wanted to learn, and I was around guys that had tons of NFL experience. I'm talking about general managers and coaches. And from day one, when I entered into the NFL arena as a coach, there was something that was said over and over and over. And it was this: this is a big man's game. And what that means is that when you're out there evaluating and you're putting your football team together, if you stick to that mantra, it's a big man's game, you're going to miss on a Barry Sanders, okay? Mm-hmm. The outlier. You're going to miss on that guy. But you would rather miss every now and then, just really very few times you're going to miss on the Barry Sanders, but you're going to hit over and over and over, and you're going to come out of the locker room, you're going to look right, you're going to be physical, you're not going to have a team full of exceptions. And I'll give you one quick story that I experienced personally. I was at Tampa Bay, and we had a tight end room of 3 NFL tight ends. They were all 6'5", 250, 260, big men. And out of nowhere, the general manager walked in and said, "We just signed Kellen Winslow." And we had to go back and redo our whole playbook, everything, because Kellen Winslow is a boutique football player.
Yeah.
He had some attributes that you could exploit, but let me tell you what it came down to. If we lined him up at a unit tight end, everybody knew we were running the other way, because Kellen only weighed 240 pounds. He couldn't block anybody.
Right.
All right. So if he was off the ball, guess what? Everybody knew that we were going to throw it. And then very soon, people quit putting their strong safety on Kellen Winslow. They put their nickelback on him. Well, a nickelback could cover Kellen, a strong safety couldn't, but it just spiraled into a bunch of unmanageable exceptions. And, and that's what I'm just generally speaking about Bryce Young being, they list him at 6 feet tall.
He's not 6 feet. He's 5'10".
No, he's 5'10" at best.
Yeah.
And not only that, he's a small-boned individual. He doesn't have girth. He's not a heavy-set 5'10" like Russell Wilson, for instance. Okay, so I just wonder, where, one good lick and you're looking at injuries, and without durability, you've got no ability. He got
hit pretty hard a bunch last year and survived it. The guy in Indianapolis got hit once and was out for the year, Richardson. Cam Newton. Guy, the Richardson guy now, that guy, there's something, I haven't watched it real close, but obviously there's something strange going on there that doesn't, it's not all physical. I'll just put it that way. Yeah. When I watch Bryce, if they use him right, if they get him moving, because I think he's exceptional on the run, not just as a runner. I mean, he can obviously do that, but that's not what you want him to do. But moving him out of the pocket, I think he's really, really good. And I think everybody we talked to in the lead up said he is a super smart player. And you can get by being really smart. I've always said, and I think you agree, that the first thing you got to do as a quarterback is just understand the game. It's played more with the mind than it is played with anything else. You have to have the other things, but if you're really smart, I think you can make up for at least some of the deficiencies. I liked what I saw, certainly in the last one. Let me ask you this quick question, though, Steve Logan, about Dave Doran at NC State, because I saw you with Stephen Igo. Hoist the Colors. He does a podcast as well. And the loss, Coach Doran did not want to admit that it was a rivalry before. He said a rival is somebody you play every year. Okay, whatever. I disagree. I think it's a rivalry game, certainly of sorts, for NC State and East Carolina. But the loss, ultimately, you say does some professional damage to Dave Doran.
Well, yeah. I mean, that was a bad loss for Dave, and I'm going to preface this. anything I say about it with this. I think Dave Doran is a really good coach.
Mm-hmm.
He's done a great job there. Okay, I really believe that. But I do, when the whole East Carolina lead up was going on, and I watched him, make the comments, and it's not really a rivalry, kind of downplaying it. And I just sat there and I said, this is exactly, and I could tell you a Pat Dye story. I don't know if you got time for it, but it relates
time for
all
you.
the way back. There's a long story, not a long story, but a story that I had a conversation with Pat Dye when I was a head coach at East Carolina, and I asked him specifically about the dynamic of East Carolina, North Carolina State. And he gave me an answer, and I won't really bore you with it, but it was really apropos to what we're talking about. And, North Carolina State approaches the East Carolina game 101% wrong, and so does Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
Carolina, Larry Fedora made a couple of comments going over to East Carolina 8 years ago and ended up getting beat like 800 to nothing. Literally. And,
yeah.
I'm like, these guys, what, they don't get it. And rather, just go ahead and admit that East Carolina is capable. They're capable.
Yep.
Every year they're capable. And for you to not prepare your locker room and just admit they're capable and get them prepared, because those kids at East Carolina, every one of them wanted to go to Carolina, and they wanted to go to North Carolina State, but they weren't recruited there. And when they show up for that game, believe me, their hair is on fire. And so, and to not just admit that, recognize it, and get your team to understand what they're walking into, it's just a fatal mistake. And I watch it happen year after year after year. And if the opposing coaches in state would just take the approach that I'm talking about, they would do exactly what Pat Dye said to me they should do. They would beat the hell out of East Carolina every year because they got better players. They do. And that's the thing that I was speaking to on my radio show, is exactly that dynamic. Now I'll go one step further. You watch, North Carolina State and East Carolina are going to open next year with each other, right? I promise you, Dave Doran and the North Carolina State Wolfpack, I don't know who's going to win the game, but North Carolina State's going to come out of the tunnel for that game. Their hair will be on fire. I promise you. And they'll approach the game properly. And there's going to be a hell of a football game breakout. And it won't be a deal where they, give up an 80-yard run with 2 minutes left or whatever, and throwing interceptions at the end of the game. They should have won the game seven ways. Yeah. But they just didn't, which is kind of a capsule of North Carolina State's season. They were very frustrating to watch this year.
Oh, yes. Especially to their own fans. To their own fans.
Yeah, and to Dave Doran. It frustrated the hell out of him, too, because those guys are working as hard as they can, and to lose the games they lost, how close they were to being really pretty good, but just never having any finish to them. Oh, week after week after week, it was really a frustrating thing to watch.
Steve Logan, by the way, the Logan Zone, Thursdays, 5 to 7, 94.3 The Game in Greenville. I'm excited to be part of that family as well. I thank you very much for your time, sir. Happy New Year. I will talk to you soon.
All right. Appreciate having me on.